Lieutenant Zara Morrison adjusted her medical kit one final time as she completed her evening rounds at Alpha Base. The desert compound hummed with its usual nighttime activity. Guards walking their posts, equipment checks echoing from the motor pool, and the distant chatter of soldiers unwinding after another scorching day in hostile territory. At 26, Zara had already earned respect among the troops for her steady hands and compassionate care. But tonight something felt different. The base communication systems had been acting strangely all week. Radio chatter kept cutting out at odd intervals, and Sergeant Torres from Communications had mentioned intercepted signals that made intelligence officers exchange worried glances. Colonel Bradshaw, the base commander, had increased security protocols without explanation, leaving everyone on edge. "Doc, you heading to bed soon?" called Private Williams from the medical bay entrance. A young soldier favored his left leg, a reminder of the improvised explosive device that had nearly ended his career 3 months earlier. Zara had spent countless hours helping him regain mobility, and his loyalty to her ran deep. "Just finishing inventory," Zara replied, checking her surgical supplies one last time. Something about the day's intelligence briefings had left her feeling unsettled. The enemy had been unusually quiet lately, and in her experience, silence often preceded violence. The base housed nearly 200 personnel, but tonight felt different. Support staff had been evacuated earlier in the week under the pretense of routine rotation, leaving only essential combat and medical personnel. The official explanation satisfied most soldiers, but Zara noticed details others missed. Emergency medical supplies had been quietly redistributed, evacuation routes had been reviewed, and helicopter landing zones had been cleared with unusual thoroughness. "Ma'am, Colonel Bradshaw wants to see you in his office," announced Corporal Jackson, appearing in the medical bay doorway with uncharacteristic formality. The radio operator typically maintained casual interactions with medical staff, but tonight his demeanor suggested official business. Colonel Bradshaw's office reflected his 30 years of military service, commendations, unit photographs, and tactical maps covering every available wall space. The gray-haired commander gestured for Zara to sit, his weathered face showing concern that went beyond routine administrative matters. "Lieutenant Morrison, I need to discuss contingency procedures with you," Bradshaw began, his tone carefully measured. "Intelligence suggests possible enemy activity in our sector. Nothing confirmed, but I want medical prepared for any scenario." Zara leaned forward, understanding that conversations about contingencies rarely happened without specific threats. "What kind of scenarios are we preparing for, sir?" "Worst case, coordinated attack on base infrastructure. If communications go down, if command structure is compromised, medical personnel may need to operate independently for extended periods." Bradshaw handed her a sealed envelope. "Emergency protocols. Only open if normal command structure fails." The weight of the envelope felt heavier than its contents should warrant. Zara had trained for battlefield medicine, mass casualty events, and evacuation procedures, but something about Bradshaw's manner suggested preparation for catastrophic scenarios that went beyond standard military planning. "Sir, should I alert other medical personnel? You're senior medical officer on duty tonight. Other staff are rotating out tomorrow morning as scheduled." Bradshaw's pause carried significance. That made Zara's stomach tighten. "Lieutenant, if something happens, remember that your primary mission is preserving life. Every decision you make should serve that objective." Walking back to the medical facility through Alpha Base's quiet corridors, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that Colonel Bradshaw had just given her instructions for scenarios he hoped would never materialize. The sealed envelope felt warm in her pocket, and she found herself mentally reviewing Emergency procedures she'd practiced but never expected to implement. The medical bay felt different when she returned. Equipment that had seemed routine hours earlier now appeared critical. Surgical supplies, emergency medications, portable stretchers, and communication devices took on new significance as potential lifelines in unknown circumstances. Private Williams was still in the medical bay, organizing equipment with unusual attention to detail. "Doc, something's got everyone on edge tonight. Security doubled perimeter guards, and motor pool's been running equipment checks every hour." "Probably just routine readiness exercises," Zara replied, though her own observations contradicted the casual explanation. Alpha Base had hosted her for 8 months, and she'd never seen security protocols implemented with such quiet intensity. The base's medical facility was designed to handle routine injuries, minor surgeries, and stabilization for medical evacuation to larger hospitals. Its basement level provided additional storage and could serve as protected space during indirect fire, but Zara had never considered it as primary medical treatment area. Tonight, reviewing emergency procedures, she found herself mentally cataloging the basement's potential as makeshift hospital. "Ma'am, you should get some rest," Williams suggested, noting her continued activity well past normal duty hours. "Tomorrow's another day." Zara looked through the medical bay windows at Alpha Base's sleeping compound. Floodlights illuminated defensive positions where soldiers maintained vigilant watch over desert approaches that stretched endlessly toward enemy territory. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, intelligence suggested hostile forces were planning activities that could turn her quiet medical facility into the center of life and death decisions for soldiers she'd come to know as friends and patients. "You're right, Williams. We should both get some rest." But as she prepared to leave the medical bay, Zara found herself taking one final inventory of emergency supplies, unconsciously preparing for challenges she couldn't yet imagine. The sealed envelope in her pocket seemed to pulse with unspoken urgency as she walked through Alpha Base's corridors toward her quarters. Tomorrow would bring either another routine day or the kind of test that defined military careers and measured character under impossible circumstances. Tonight, Lieutenant Zara Morrison went to sleep, not knowing that her next few hours would transform her from a base medical officer into a guardian angel for 18 soldiers, whose lives would depend entirely on her refusal to abandon them when everything around them turned to hell. The first missile struck Alpha Base at exactly 3 minutes past 4 in the morning, transforming Lieutenant Zara Morrison's world from peaceful sleep to violent chaos in the span of a heartbeat. The explosion that destroyed the communications tower sent a pillar of orange fire into the pre-dawn darkness, its shockwave shattering windows throughout the medical facility and throwing Zara from her cot against the equipment cabinet with bone-jarring force. Emergency sirens wailed for exactly 17 seconds before the second missile obliterated the command center, killing Colonel Bradshaw instantly and plunging Alpha Base into the kind of catastrophic emergency that military planners prepare for, but pray never happens. The base alarm system managed one final warning: all personnel to battle stations. Before electrical systems failed and emergency lighting flickered on throughout the compound, Zara pulled herself upright in the medical bay, quickly assessing her situation through training that kicked in automatically despite the ringing in her ears. The building had sustained structural damage but remained standing. Outside, she could hear the distinctive whistle of incoming artillery and panicked shouts of soldiers scrambling for cover in a base that was rapidly becoming a death trap. The third missile hit the main barracks, and Zara felt the concussion wave through the medical facility's walls as ceiling tiles rained down around her. Through the shattered windows, she could see that Alpha Base was under systematic bombardment designed to destroy infrastructure and eliminate personnel with methodical precision. Vehicle wreckage already burned throughout the compound, and ammunition. Stores were beginning to explode in chain reactions that lit the night sky. Medical. We need medical. The first wounded soldier stumbled through the medical bay doors, his uniform torn and bloodied from shrapnel wounds that painted red streaks across his face. Behind him, 2 more soldiers supported a third who was unconscious and bleeding from a severe head injury that required immediate attention. "Get him on the table," Zara commanded, her medical training overriding the chaos surrounding them. "Apply pressure to that wound. You grab those gauze packets and start bandaging his arm." Her hands moved automatically through procedures she'd practiced countless times, but never under conditions where each decision might be the difference between life and death. More wounded soldiers began arriving as the missile barrage continued with relentless intensity. Each explosion brought new casualties and made the medical bay more dangerous as structural damage accumulated. Pipes burst, electrical systems sparked, and the smell of smoke began filtering through the ventilation system as fires spread throughout Alpha Base. "Ma'am, the whole base is getting hit," reported Corporal Jackson, the radio operator who delivered Colonel Bradshaw's message the night before. Blood streamed from a gash on his forehead, but his injuries appeared minor compared to other casualties. Flooding the medical facility. Command post is gone. Fire control's gone. I think we're the only building still standing. Zara looked around the medical bay, mentally cataloging her resources against the growing number of wounded soldiers who needed immediate care. The facility wasn't designed to handle this many casualties, and the ongoing bombardment made normal. Evacuation procedures impossible. Through the broken windows, she could see that the entire compound was becoming an inferno that would consume anyone caught in the open. "Jackson, I need you to help me move the seriously wounded to the basement storage area. It's more protected down there," she decided, remembering Colonel Bradshaw's emphasis on preserving life above all other considerations. The sealed envelope in her pocket suddenly made perfect sense. He'd known this moment was coming. "Ma'am, what about evacuation?" "What about evacuation? Shouldn't we be trying to get out of here?" asked Private Williams, whose leg injury from months earlier now seemed insignificant compared to the trauma cases arriving with each explosion. Zara looked through the shattered windows at the inferno outside. Vehicle wreckage burned throughout the compound. Ammunition stores exploded in brilliant flashes, and enemy artillery continued falling with mechanical precision designed to eliminate any possibility of organized resistance or escape. "There's nowhere to evacuate to right now," she replied with calm authority that surprised even herself. "We're staying here until help arrives, and I'm keeping everyone alive until that happens." The basement of the medical facility had originally been designed for supply storage, but its reinforced concrete construction made it the safest location available. Zara organized the evacuation of wounded soldiers while continuing to treat injuries under increasingly dangerous conditions that tested every aspect of her medical training. "Ma'am, the roof is starting to collapse in the east wing," reported Private Williams, who'd been helping move stretcher cases to the basement despite his own mobility limitations. Chunks of concrete and twisted metal now blocked several corridors, making movement through the building increasingly hazardous. "Then we move faster. How many more do we have upstairs?" Zara asked, making rapid decisions about treatment priorities, while coordinating the movement of patients to safety. Her medical training included battlefield triage, but she'd never applied it under conditions where the battlefield was her own medical facility. 6 walking wounded and 3 stretcher cases, Williams replied, his voice tight with pain as his old injury protested the physical demands of patient evacuation. The artillery barrage continued with systematic intensity, each explosion bringing down more of Alpha Base's infrastructure, while Zara worked in the basement with flashlights and emergency medical supplies. She was treating everything from minor shrapnel wounds to life-threatening injuries that required surgical intervention using improvised equipment under impossible conditions. Her patients ranged from Private Rodriguez, who had suffered a severe concussion when the barracks collapsed, to Sergeant Martinez, whose chest injury required immediate surgical attention using tools designed for routine medical procedures rather than battlefield surgery. Each patient required different levels of care, and Zara had to manage multiple medical emergencies simultaneously while explosions continued overhead. "Morrison, we've got a problem," called Sergeant Torres from the basement entrance, his voice carrying new urgency that cut through the constant noise of artillery bombardment. "The whole building's on fire now. Smoke's getting bad up there." Zara looked around the basement at 18 wounded soldiers in various conditions of injury and medical need. Some could walk with assistance, others required stretchers for any movement, and several needed continuous medical attention to prevent their conditions from deteriorating into life-threatening emergencies. The reality of their situation was becoming clear. They were trapped in a burning building on a base under enemy bombardment, with nowhere to go and no immediate prospect of rescue. "Torres, check the ventilation shafts. There should be an emergency exit that leads to the vehicle maintenance area," Zara commanded, her voice steady despite the impossibility of their situation. The basement was filling with smoke from the fires raging above them, and she could feel the building structure groaning under the stress of continued bombardment and spreading flames. "Ma'am, that's on the other side of the compound. Everything over there is burning," Torres replied, but he moved toward the ventilation access anyway, understanding that staying in the basement meant certain death for all 18 wounded soldiers under Zara's care. "Then we're going to have to go through the fire," Zara announced with quiet determination that surprised everyone in the basement, including herself. The words came out with absolute conviction, as if moving 18 wounded soldiers through a burning compound under enemy artillery bombardment was a routine medical procedure rather than an act of apparent suicide. Her evacuation plan required moving critically injured patients through a tunnel system that connected various buildings on Alpha Base. The tunnels hadn't been designed for patient evacuation, but they provided the only protection from artillery fire that was destroying everything above ground with methodical precision. "Listen up, everyone," Zara addressed the assembled wounded soldiers, her voice carrying authority that made them focus despite their pain and fear. "We're moving to the vehicle maintenance bunker. It's underground and should protect us from the bombardment. Walking wounded help carry stretcher cases. Nobody gets left behind." Private Rodriguez raised his hand despite the bandages wrapped around his head from his concussion injury. "Ma'am, what if enemy forces have ground troops moving in? Shouldn't we be trying to establish defensive positions?" Zara looked at the young soldier who was asking tactical questions while dealing with a probable brain injury that could kill him without continued medical attention. His concern about enemy ground forces was valid, but their immediate threat came from the artillery bombardment and spreading fires that were rapidly eliminating any possibility of survival in their current location. "Rodriguez, right now our mission is survival. If enemy ground forces show up, we'll deal with that when it happens," she replied, knowing that 18 wounded soldiers in an underground bunker would have little chance against organized enemy infantry, but understanding that their alternative was certain death from the fires consuming Alpha Base. The movement through the tunnel system took 45 minutes of careful coordination that tested every aspect of Zara's leadership and medical skills. The tunnels were narrow and poorly lit, requiring precise planning to move stretcher cases without causing additional injuries to patients who were already fighting for their lives. Zara had to monitor her most critical patients while ensuring that walking wounded could maintain the pace necessary to reach safety before smoke inhalation or structural collapse trapped them permanently underground. Private Martinez's chest wound required constant attention to prevent internal bleeding, while Sergeant Johnson's head injury needed continuous monitoring for signs of brain swelling that could be fatal without immediate surgical intervention. The vehicle maintenance bunker was a large underground facility designed to protect armored vehicles from air attacks. It provided space for wounded soldiers and protection from ongoing bombardment, but it lacked medical equipment and proper lighting for the kind of complex medical care that several patients required to survive the night. "Torres, get me an inventory of what medical supplies we managed to bring down here," Zara ordered, immediately beginning to organize a makeshift medical station using maintenance equipment and emergency supplies. "Williams, check those emergency supply cabinets for anything useful. Rodriguez, despite your head injury, you're our best communication specialist. Try to establish contact with anyone outside this base." Her patients required everything from minor wound care to complex surgical procedures that would challenge a fully equipped hospital, and she had to improvise solutions using tools and materials designed for vehicle repair rather than human medical treatment. The artillery bombardment continued overhead, each explosion reminding them that enemy forces were systematically destroying Alpha Base while they fought for survival in an underground shelter that could become their tomb. "Ma'am, I'm getting weak radio signals from outside," Rodriguez reported from the communications equipment he'd managed to set up using spare parts from vehicle maintenance supplies. "Sounds like rescue forces are trying to coordinate a response, but they're having trouble getting through the artillery barrage. How long until they can reach us?" Zara asked, while simultaneously treating Sergeant Martinez's chest wound and monitoring Private Johnson's neurological responses for signs of deteriorating brain function. "Unknown, ma'am. Could be hours, could be longer," Rodriguez replied, his voice reflecting the uncertainty that everyone in the bunker understood, but nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. Zara looked around the bunker at her patients, understanding that some were stable enough to survive an extended wait, while others needed continuous medical attention that would determine whether they lived or died before rescue forces could reach them. Hour after hour, the bombardment continued while she worked without rest, moving between patients, managing pain medication supplies, monitoring vital signs, and making life or death decisions about treatment priorities. Morrison called Sergeant Torres from his position near the bunker entrance, his voice carrying new tension that made everyone freeze. "We've got a new problem. I think I hear vehicles moving around up there." Zara stopped her work on Private Martinez's chest wound and listened carefully to sounds from above their underground shelter. Beyond the continuing explosions of artillery bombardment, she could hear the distinctive rumble of tracked vehicles moving through Alpha Base's compound with deliberate purpose that suggested organized ground forces rather than random equipment. "Movement. Enemy ground forces, probably," Torres whispered. "Sounds like they're doing systematic searches for survivors." The realization hit everyone in the bunker simultaneously. They had survived the artillery bombardment and managed to establish a protected medical facility, only to face capture or execution by enemy infantry forces who were now controlling the surface of Alpha Base. 18 wounded American soldiers in an underground bunker with limited weapons and no communication with friendly forces represented exactly the kind of tactical nightmare that military planners work to avoid. "Torres, what weapons do we have available?" Zara asked, making rapid calculations about their defensive capabilities against organized enemy forces who would have superior numbers, better equipment, and tactical advantage. 4 rifles, limited ammunition, and whatever sidearms the walking wounded still have, Torres replied grimly. "That's not enough to fight off a serious assault if they find us down here." "We need a different plan," Zara agreed, understanding. that her medical training would now have to include tactical thinking that went far beyond treating battlefield injuries. She needed to protect 18 patients who couldn't defend themselves against an enemy force that would show no mercy to wounded American soldiers. The sound of enemy forces searching Alpha Base continued through the night while Zara worked to keep her patients alive in the underground bunker. Foreign voices echoed across the compound as hostile troops systematically cleared buildings and eliminated any remaining resistance with methodical efficiency that spoke to professional military training rather than irregular forces. "Ma'am, they're getting closer," whispered Private Williams from his position near the bunker entrance, where he maintained watch despite his leg injury and the risk that enemy forces might detect their hiding place at any moment. The distinctive sound of boots on metal stairs and foreign voices calling commands was growing louder with each passing hour. Zara checked her watch in the dim emergency lighting that provided the only illumination in their makeshift medical facility. 10 hours since the initial artillery attack had begun, and they were still waiting for rescue while enemy forces controlled the surface of Alpha Base with apparent complete dominance over the compound that had been their home for months. "Rodriguez, any change in radio contact with rescue forces?" she asked, while continuing to monitor Sergeant Martinez's chest wound and adjusting pain medication for Private Johnson, whose head injury required constant attention to prevent fatal complications from developing in their primitive medical conditions. "Still getting weak signals, ma'am, but nothing concrete about timing or rescue operations," Rodriguez replied, his voice strained from the concussion that was affecting his ability to operate communications equipment effectively. "Sounds like Commander Phillips is trying to coordinate a rescue mission, but enemy forces are preventing helicopter operations in this sector." The waiting was becoming as dangerous as the initial artillery bombardment had been. Several of Zara's patients were developing complications that required medical interventions beyond what their improvised bunker facility could provide. Without proper surgical equipment, adequate lighting, or sufficient medical supplies, she was fighting a losing battle against injuries that would be treatable in any normal medical environment. "Torres, help me move Sergeant Martinez to better lighting. His chest wound is showing signs of internal bleeding that I can't control with current equipment," Zara ordered, understanding that her patient was deteriorating despite her best efforts. To provide adequate medical care under impossible circumstances, the sound of footsteps on metal stairs leading directly to their bunker entrance made everyone freeze in position. Enemy soldiers had found their hiding place, and the next few minutes would determine whether 18 wounded American soldiers survived their ordeal or died as prisoners of war in the basement of their own medical facility. "Stay quiet and let me handle this," Zara whispered to her patients, positioning herself between the bunker entrance and the wounded soldiers, who were depending on her for protection that went far beyond medical care. Her training had prepared her for battlefield medicine, but nothing in her experience had covered negotiating with enemy forces for the lives of patients under her care. The bunker door burst open with sudden violence, and 3 enemy soldiers entered with weapons raised and ready for combat. They stopped immediately when they saw Zara standing in the middle of what appeared to be an improvised medical facility, surrounded by obviously wounded American soldiers who posed no immediate threat to anyone. "American doctor?" one of the soldiers asked in broken English. His weapon still pointed in Zara's direction, but his finger no longer on the trigger as he assessed the medical situation that was clearly different from what they had expected to find in their systematic search of Alpha Base. "I'm Lieutenant Zara Morrison, United States Army Medical Corps," she replied with calm authority that surprised even herself under the circumstances. "These are wounded soldiers under my care who require immediate medical attention to survive." The enemy soldiers spoke among themselves in their own language while examining the makeshift medical equipment and noting the obvious severity of several patients' injuries. Their leader appeared to be making decisions about how to handle a situation that military protocols probably didn't cover in specific detail. "You come with us," the enemy soldier finally announced in English. "Wounded soldiers stay here under guard." "I'm not leaving my patients," Zara replied firmly. "They need continuous medical care, and several of them will die without immediate treatment that only I can provide." The enemy soldier raised his weapon toward one of the wounded Americans in a gesture that made his intentions perfectly clear. "You come now, or we execute wounded soldiers immediately." Zara understood that she was facing an impossible choice between abandoning her patients to save herself or refusing and watching them be executed in front of her. Either option meant failure of her primary mission to preserve life. But one alternative offered at least some possibility that her patients might survive until rescue forces arrived. "Wait," she said quickly. "I'll come with you, but I need 5 minutes to stabilize my critical patients first. Without immediate medical interventions, 3 of these soldiers will die before rescue forces can reach them." The enemy soldiers agreed to wait while Zara made rapid preparations for leaving her patients, understanding that she was probably being taken for interrogation or execution, but hoping that her medical expertise might provide some protection, and that her absence would be temporary rather than permanent. She gave emergency instructions to Sergeant Torres and arranged pain medication supplies for her most seriously wounded patients, knowing that her improvised medical training for enlisted personnel might be their only chance for survival during whatever period she would be separated from them. "Torres, Commander Phillips is supposed to arrive with a rescue force," she whispered urgently. "Keep everyone alive until he gets here. Follow the emergency medical procedures I taught you, and don't let anyone give up hope." "Ma'am, what if these enemy soldiers are taking you to be executed?" Torres asked quietly, voicing the concern that everyone in the bunker understood, but nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. "Then you're in charge of medical care until help arrives," Zara replied with steady determination. "Take care of our people, and remember that every decision you make should serve one objective: keeping everyone alive until rescue arrives." As enemy soldiers escorted her from the bunker, Zara took one final look at the 18 wounded American soldiers who had survived artillery bombardment and enemy occupation because of her refusal to abandon them during the worst night of their military careers. Now their survival would depend on her ability to stay alive long enough for Commander Phillips to complete whatever rescue operation he was planning. The destroyed compound above ground revealed the full extent of damage from 10 hours of systematic bombardment. Every building was either completely destroyed or burning. Vehicle wreckage littered the area, and smoke continued rising from ammunition stores that were still exploding intermittently as fires reached stored ordnance throughout Alpha Base. Enemy forces had established a temporary command post in the only building that remained partially intact after 10 hours of systematic bombardment. As they escorted Zara through the devastated compound, she could see that the attack on Alpha Base had been planned and executed with military precision designed to eliminate American forces while preserving enough infrastructure for enemy occupation. "Lieutenant Morrison, I am Major Petrov," announced the enemy officer who spoke significantly better English than his subordinates. His uniform and bearing suggested professional military training and command authority that went beyond the irregular forces she had initially expected. "You will provide medical care for our wounded soldiers who require immediate attention. I'll treat wounded according to medical ethics and Geneva Convention protocols," Zara replied carefully. "But I have critically wounded American soldiers in that bunker who need immediate medical care to survive. Several of them will die without continued treatment. Your wounded soldiers are now prisoners of war under our control," Major Petrov stated with cold efficiency. "They will receive appropriate medical care when convenient for our operations." Your immediate responsibility is treating our casualties who have priority for medical attention. Zara understood that she was being used as a medical asset, while her patients were essentially being held as hostages to ensure her cooperation. The enemy's strategy was to exploit her medical expertise while maintaining complete control over the American survivors who were depending on her for their lives. Major, I need to return to my patients immediately. Several of them have life-threatening injuries that require continuous medical monitoring and treatment that only I can provide, she insisted, knowing that Sergeant Martinez's chest wound and Private Johnson's head injury were deteriorating conditions that would become fatal without proper medical intervention. You will treat our wounded first, Lieutenant. Your soldiers will wait until our medical needs are satisfied, Petrov replied, making it clear that medical care for American prisoners would be provided only after enemy casualties received priority. Treatment. Zara was escorted to another partially damaged building, where enemy forces had established their own medical facility for treating casualties from their assault on Alpha Base. Several wounded enemy soldiers needed immediate surgical attention, and her captors expected her to prioritize their medical needs over the American wounded she had spent the night keeping alive under impossible circumstances. For the next 4 hours, Zara provided medical care to enemy wounded while constantly worrying about the 18 American soldiers she had left in the bunker under the emergency medical supervision of Sergeant Torres, whose training was limited to basic first aid that would be inadequate for the complex medical conditions several patients were developing. Her medical training required her to treat all patients regardless of nationality or military affiliation, but her loyalty remained with the soldiers who were depending on her expertise for survival. Every minute spent treating enemy casualties was time that her own patients were suffering without proper medical care in their underground shelter. The enemy medical facility was better equipped than her improvised bunker operation, but working under armed guard while her own soldiers faced life-threatening medical emergencies created psychological pressure that challenged her ability to provide effective medical care even for enemy patients who needed her expertise. Major, how long do you intend to keep me separated from my patients? Zara asked during a brief break between surgical procedures on wounded enemy soldiers. Medical ethics require me to provide care for all wounded personnel, including American soldiers under my responsibility. Lieutenant, your patients are now prisoners who receive medical care at our discretion, Petrov replied. Your value to us depends on your cooperation in treating our wounded personnel who have priority for your medical expertise. At exactly 6 hours after the initial bombardment had begun, the distinctive sound of American helicopters approaching Alpha Base changed the tactical situation dramatically. Commander Phillips had arrived with the rescue force that Rodriguez had been trying to contact throughout the night from their bunker communications equipment. Major, those are American aircraft approaching the base, Zara informed her captor, hoping that rescue operations were finally beginning for the soldiers who had survived the night under conditions that should have killed everyone at Alpha Base. Yes, Lieutenant, and now we negotiate for the lives of your wounded soldiers, Petrov replied with calm satisfaction, revealing that the enemy's strategy had always included using American survivors as bargaining chips in whatever negotiations would be necessary to secure their own safe withdrawal from Alpha Base. The rescue operation immediately became a standoff between American forces attempting to evacuate their wounded personnel and enemy troops, who were holding 18 critically injured soldiers as hostages in an underground bunker that could become a mass grave if negotiations failed to produce an acceptable agreement. Commander Phillips, this is Major Petrov of the Revolutionary Guard, the enemy officer announced over captured American radio equipment. We control Alpha Base and are holding 18 wounded American soldiers along with their medical officer. We are prepared to negotiate their release under appropriate terms. Major Petrov, This is Commander Phillips, United States Navy. We're here to evacuate our wounded personnel and any survivors from Alpha Base. Came the reply over radio communications that everyone in the enemy command post could hear clearly. Commander, we have 18 wounded American soldiers in secured location, plus their medical officer who's been providing care for our wounded personnel. Petrov responded. We are willing to discuss prisoner exchange arrangements that serve the interests of both our forces. The negotiation continued for 2 hours, while Zara provided medical care under enemy supervision, knowing that her patients in the bunker were running out of time. Several of them would die without immediate medical interventions that only she could provide. But the standoff between American rescue forces and enemy troops was preventing any medical evacuation or treatment. Major, I need to check on my patients in the bunker, Zara insisted during the prolonged negotiations. They've been without proper medical care for over 6 hours, and several of them have life-threatening conditions that will become fatal without immediate treatment. Lieutenant, you remain here until negotiations reach successful conclusion, Petrov replied firmly. Your patients receive appropriate care when prisoner exchange arrangements are finalized to mutual satisfaction. Commander Phillips's voice crackled over the enemy radio, communications with professional authority that cut through the tension of negotiations that would determine the fate of 19 American military personnel. Major Petrov, we're prepared to offer a humanitarian prisoner exchange. We have wounded enemy personnel who require medical care, and you have wounded American soldiers who need immediate medical attention. What specific terms do you propose, Commander? Major Petrov responded, his tone suggesting genuine interest. In negotiations, rather than the delaying tactics that Zara had feared, would prolong her separation from patients whose medical conditions were deteriorating with each passing hour. Medical personnel and wounded from both sides receive immediate care while we arrange formal prisoner exchange, Phillips offered. Lieutenant Morrison returns to treat American wounded soldiers. Your medical staff treats enemy wounded personnel. Both sides provide humanitarian medical care, regardless of military affiliation. The proposal represented exactly the kind of solution that military medical ethics demanded, but Zara understood that enemy acceptance would depend on tactical considerations that went beyond humanitarian concerns. Major Petrov needed to secure safe withdrawal for his forces while maintaining leverage in negotiations that could determine whether his mission succeeded or failed. Commander, we accept medical care arrangement under specific conditions. Petrov finally agreed after consultation with his subordinates. American medical officer returns to treat wounded prisoners. Enemy wounded receive equivalent medical care from American medical personnel. Both sides maintain current positions during prisoner exchange negotiations. The agreement allowed Zara to return to the bunker where she found 18 American soldiers in various stages of medical crisis that had developed during the 6 hours she had been separated from them. Several patients had developed complications from their original injuries. Others were suffering from shock and dehydration, and all of them needed immediate medical attention that would challenge her skills even under normal hospital conditions. Torres, report on patient status. She ordered immediately upon entering the makeshift medical facility that Sergeant Torres and the walking wounded had maintained during her absence. Ma'am, Martinez is critical. His chest wound reopened and he's lost significant blood. Williams developed a fever, probably from infection in his leg wound. Johnson's been unconscious for the past 2 hours, and his pupils aren't responding normally to light, Torres reported grimly. Zara immediately began emergency medical procedures while coordinating with Commander Phillips over radio communications for medical evacuation that would require continued cooperation between American rescue forces and enemy troops who were still holding her patients as prisoners of war. Commander Phillips, this is Lieutenant Morrison. I have 18 wounded. American soldiers who need immediate medical evacuation. 3 are in critical condition and won't survive much longer without hospital-level medical care, she reported while simultaneously working to stabilize Sergeant Martinez's chest wound that had deteriorated dangerously during her absence. Lieutenant, we have medical helicopters standing by, but we can't land until the tactical situation is resolved, Phillips replied. Major Petrov, we need immediate medical evacuation for critically wounded personnel from both sides. The prisoner exchange negotiation took another 3 hours to finalize, during which Zara worked frantically to keep her most critical patients alive while enemy forces maintained control over the bunker that had become their prison as much as their shelter. Every minute of delay increased the risk that soldiers who had survived artillery, bombardment, and enemy occupation would die from medical complications that proper hospital care could easily treat. Ma'am, Martinez's pulse is getting weaker, reported Torres, who had become Zara's primary medical assistant during the crisis. I don't think he can survive much longer without surgical intervention that we can't provide here. Keep pressure on that chest wound and monitor his breathing, Zara ordered while checking Private Johnson's neurological responses for signs of brain swelling that could be fatal without immediate surgical decompression. Commander Phillips, we need those medical helicopters immediately. I'm losing patients who could be saved with proper medical evacuation. Lieutenant, prisoner exchange is almost finalized, Phillips responded. Medical evacuation for all wounded personnel will begin within the hour. Both American and enemy wounded will receive appropriate medical care according to Geneva Convention protocols. The final prisoner exchange agreement allowed medical evacuation of all wounded personnel while maintaining the standoff between American rescue forces and enemy troops who would withdraw from Alpha Base under negotiated terms that prevented further combat casualties on either side. Torres, help me prepare patients for medical evacuation, Zara ordered as the sound of approaching helicopters indicated that rescue operations were finally beginning after more than 12 hours of survival under conditions that had tested every aspect of her medical training and leadership abilities. Ma'am, what about the enemy soldiers who held us prisoner? Torres asked as they prepared stretchers for patients who would finally receive proper hospital care. They'll be treated according to the same medical ethics that governed our care of American wounded, Zara replied, understanding that medical personnel had obligations that transcended military conflicts and national loyalties. The medical evacuation. Helicopters landed under ceasefire arrangements that allowed both American and enemy wounded to receive humanitarian medical care. Zara accompanied her patients during transport, continuing to provide medical treatment that had kept 18 soldiers alive through one of the most challenging medical operations in recent military history. Lieutenant Morrison, what you accomplished during the past 12 hours represents extraordinary medical service under impossible conditions, Commander Phillips told her as wounded soldiers were loaded onto evacuation helicopters. 18 soldiers are alive because you refused to abandon them when any reasonable person would have given up hope. Zara looked at the burning remains of Alpha Base, understanding that she had experienced something that would define the rest of her military career and her understanding of what medical service really meant under combat conditions. The tested character as much as medical expertise. The medical evacuation. Helicopters circled Alpha Base while final negotiations determined the sequence of patient loading and transport priorities. Commander Phillips had established a temporary ceasefire that allowed humanitarian medical operations to proceed. But the tactical situation remained tense as American rescue forces and enemy troops maintained their positions around the compound. Lieutenant Morrison, we need to prioritize critical patients for immediate evacuation, announced Chief Medical Officer Captain Rebecca Johnson over the helicopter radio communications. Who needs hospital-level medical care that can't wait for second transport? Zara looked around the bunker at her 18 patients, making rapid triage decisions that would determine who received immediate medical evacuation and who would have to wait for subsequent helicopter transport. Sergeant Martinez's chest wound, Private Johnson's head injury, and Corporal Davidson's internal bleeding represented life-threatening conditions that required immediate hospital intervention. Martinez, Johnson, and Davidson go on the first helicopter. She decided. Torres, help me get them ready for transport. Everyone else will go on the second flight, but we need to stabilize walking wounded for helicopter evacuation procedures. The process of moving critically wounded patients from the underground bunker to helicopter landing zones required careful coordination between American medical personnel and enemy forces who were maintaining security around the evacuation area. Each stretcher case had to be transported through damaged buildings and across a compound littered with unexploded ordnance and structural debris. Ma'am, Major Petrov wants to speak with you before the helicopters depart, announced one of the enemy soldiers who had been guarding the bunker throughout the prisoner exchange negotiations. His tone suggested official business rather than the hostile attitude that had characterized earlier interactions. Zara followed the enemy soldier to where Major Petrov waited near the helicopter landing zone, understanding that final arrangements needed to be confirmed before medical evacuation could proceed without complications that might endanger wounded personnel from both sides. Lieutenant Morrison, I want to acknowledge that your medical care of enemy wounded was conducted according to professional standards despite the circumstances of your capture, Petrov said formally. Your medical ethics reflect credit on American military medical training and personal character. Thank you, Major. Medical care is a humanitarian obligation that transcends military conflicts, Zara replied, understanding that professional recognition from an enemy officer represented acknowledgement of medical service that had maintained ethical standards under extremely difficult circumstances. Your wounded soldiers survived because of medical expertise and personal dedication that impressed our medical personnel, Petrov continued. We wanted to ensure that appropriate recognition was provided for medical service that preserved lives. During combat operations, the formal exchange represented an unusual moment of professional respect between military medical personnel who had maintained humanitarian obligations, despite the hostile circumstances that had brought them together. Both sides had honored medical ethics that required care for wounded, regardless of nationality or military affiliation. Lieutenant, the helicopters are ready for patient loading, called Commander Phillips over radio communications. We need to begin medical evacuation immediately to ensure critical patients receive hospital care before their conditions deteriorate further. The loading of critically wounded patients onto medical evacuation helicopters required precise coordination to prevent additional injuries during transport procedures. Sergeant Martinez's chest wound needed continuous monitoring during helicopter evacuation, while Private Johnson's head injury required careful positioning to prevent complications that could develop during flight operations. Torres, you're coming with me on the first helicopter to assist with patient care during transport, Zara decided. Williams and Rodriguez will supervise loading of remaining patients on the second helicopter. Everyone maintains medical monitoring responsibilities until we reach the field hospital. The first medical evacuation helicopter lifted off from Alpha Base, carrying 3 critical patients and medical personnel who continued providing care during transport to the field hospital located 2 hours away by helicopter. Zara worked continuously during the flight, monitoring vital signs and adjusting medical treatments for patients whose survival depended on maintaining stable conditions until they reached proper surgical facilities. Ma'am, Martinez's breathing is becoming irregular, reported Torres over the helicopter communication system. His chest wound may be affecting lung function more than we initially diagnosed. Increase oxygen flow and monitor his pulse, Zara ordered while checking private Johnson's neurological responses for signs of brain swelling that could become fatal during helicopter transport. Commander Phillips, we need priority landing at the field hospital. Martinez and Johnson both need immediate surgical intervention. The field hospital had been alerted to incoming casualties and was prepared to receive patients who had survived. One of the most challenging medical operations in recent military history. Surgical teams were standing by to provide hospital-level medical care that would complete the treatment process that Zara had begun under impossible conditions at Alpha Base. Lieutenant Morrison, Medical Command wants a full briefing on your patient care procedures during the Alpha Base incident, announced Captain Johnson as the helicopter approached the field hospital landing zone. Your improvised medical techniques under extreme conditions will become part of training programs for military medical personnel. Ma'am, I just did what any medical officer would do under the circumstances, Zara replied, though she understood. That's surviving 12 hours of artillery bombardment, enemy occupation, and prisoner exchange while keeping 18 wounded soldiers alive represented medical service. That went beyond normal expectations for battlefield medicine. Lieutenant, not every medical officer could have accomplished what you did, Captain Johnson responded. You turned a military disaster into a successful rescue operation through medical expertise and personal courage that saved 18 lives under conditions that should have resulted in total casualties. The landing at the field hospital marked the end of the most challenging medical operation of Zara's military career. 18 wounded American soldiers were alive and receiving proper hospital care because one medical officer had refused to abandon her patients when everything around them was being destroyed by enemy action. 6 months after the Alpha Base incident, Captain Zara Morrison stood before a formation of military medical personnel at the Army Medical Training Center, wearing the Silver Star that had been awarded for her actions during the defense of Alpha Base. The medal represented official recognition for medical service that had preserved 18 lives under conditions that military planners use as examples of impossible circumstances. Medical personnel face unique challenges in combat situations. She addressed the assembled students who were training for battlefield medicine assignments. Your primary mission is always the preservation of life, regardless of the tactical situations surrounding your medical operations. Sometimes, that mission requires decisions and actions that go beyond normal medical procedures. The audience of future military medics understood that they were receiving instruction from someone who had proven that medical training, combined with personal determination, could overcome circumstances that appeared hopeless. Captain Morrison's actions at Alpha Base had become legend among military medical personnel worldwide. The most important lesson from Alpha Base is that medical officers never abandon their patients. Zara continued, remembering the faces of 18 soldiers who had trusted her with their lives during the longest night of her military career. When everything around you is falling apart, when normal procedures become impossible, when survival itself seems unlikely, your obligation remains the same. Keep everyone alive until help arrives. Private Amanda Foster raised her hand from the front row of the medical training class. Ma'am, how do you make medical decisions when you don't have proper equipment or normal support systems? You improvise, you adapt, and you never give up, Zara replied, recalling the basement of the medical facility where she had performed surgery using maintenance tools and provided critical care with emergency supplies. Medical training gives you knowledge and procedures. But battlefield medicine requires creativity and determination that goes beyond textbook solutions. The intelligence gathered from the Alpha Base incident had provided valuable information about enemy tactics that prevented similar attacks on other American positions. The systematic bombardment followed by ground force occupation represented a coordinated strategy that military planners now understood and could counter with appropriate defensive measures. Captain Morrison, What was the most difficult decision you faced during the Alpha Base incident? Asked Sergeant Williams, the same soldier whose leg injury had been treated during the bombardment and who had volunteered to become a medical training instructor after his recovery. Leaving my patients to provide medical care for enemy wounded, Zara answered honestly. Medical ethics required me to treat all wounded personnel, but my loyalty remained with the soldiers who were depending on me for survival. Sometimes medical service requires decisions that challenge personal feelings while maintaining professional obligations. The 18 soldiers who had survived the Alpha Base incident had all returned to military service after recovery from their injuries. Sergeant Martinez had received a Purple Heart for his chest wound and continued serving as a combat engineer. Private Johnson had recovered completely from his head injury and was now training other soldiers in combat communications. Each survivor carried forward the memory of a medical officer who had refused to let them die when death seemed certain. The enemy forces who attacked Alpha Base learned that some medical officers represent a different kind of threat, Zara told her students. They discovered that medical personnel who are committed to preserving life can be more dangerous than any weapon, especially when they're protecting soldiers who trust them with their lives. Captain Rebecca Johnson, who had supervised the medical evacuation from Alpha Base, joined Zara for the concluding portion of the training session. Students, Captain Morrison's actions represent the highest standards of military medical service. She proved that expertise combined with determination can overcome any obstacle when the mission is preserving life. Medical training prepares you for procedures and protocols, Zara added, but character prepares you for moments when normal procedures become impossible, and you have to decide whether to give up or find a way to keep fighting for your patients' lives. The training session concluded with students understanding that military medical service represented more than treating injuries and managing medical emergencies. They had learned from someone who had demonstrated that medical personnel could influence the outcome of military operations through dedication that went beyond normal expectations for battlefield medicine. After the training session, Zara walked through the medical center that had become her new assignment, understanding that her experience at Alpha Base had changed her perspective on medical service and military obligations. She had learned that the most powerful weapon in any military operation was a medical officer who refused to let anyone die on their watch. Captain Morrison, you have visitors, announced a duty nurse from the medical center reception area. 18 former patients from Alpha Base had arrived for a reunion that honored the medical officer who had kept them alive during the worst night of their military careers. Sergeant Martinez, whose chest wound had healed completely, spoke for the group. Ma'am, we wanted to thank you again for what you did at Alpha Base. 18 soldiers went home to their families because you understood that medical service means never giving up on the people who trust you with their lives. You all survived because you refused to quit fighting, Zara replied, looking at faces that reminded her why medical service represented the most important mission in any military operation. I just provided medical care while you provided the courage and determination that kept everyone alive until rescue arrived. The reunion represented more than gratitude for medical care provided under extreme circumstances. It celebrated the kind of bond that develops between medical personnel and patients, who have shared experiences that test character and reveal the true meaning of military service. Ma'am, we have something for you, announced Torres, presenting a plaque that had been signed by all 18 Alpha Base survivors. The inscription read, "To Captain Zara Morrison, guardian angel of Alpha Base, who proved that heroes wear medical scrubs." Today, Major Zara Morrison continues training military medical personnel who learn that medical service represents more than treating injuries and managing emergencies. Her students discover that battlefield medicine requires character that enables medical officers to make impossible decisions and take extraordinary risks to ensure that everyone under their care survives to return home. The enemy forces who thought they could destroy Alpha Base learned that some medical officers possess determination that transforms military disasters into rescue operations. They discovered that medical personnel who understand their mission can be more effective than any weapon when they're protecting soldiers who depend on them for survival. Somewhere tonight, a military medical officer is facing impossible circumstances, not knowing that their moment to prove that dedication and expertise can overcome any obstacle might be approaching faster than incoming artillery. They will discover, as Zara Morrison did, that the most powerful force in any army is a medical officer who refuses to let anyone die on their watch. The 18 soldiers who survived Alpha Base because of one medical officer's refusal to abandon them carry forward a simple truth. Heroes don't always carry weapons. Sometimes they carry medical supplies and the determination to preserve life when everyone else has given up hope. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.